if you overdo it and do it right and really kind of connect to the person and oversolve the problem, you can turn this negative situation into a really positive one and really build this loyalty and this advocacy that we talked about as being so important, regardless of whether this is a B2B engagement or a B2C engagement, as this was.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Kimberly and we're really glad to have all of you join with us today. On the show, we talk to CX and technology experts from around the globe. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as the top platform by INC Magazine, Tech World, CIO Magazine, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Alex Farmer is the Vice President of Customer Success at Cognite, a global industrial AI SaaS company supporting the full-scale digital transformation of heavy asset industries around the world. He is a customer success executive with experience in building post-scale teams to reduce churn and increase growth at high-growth B2B SaaS scale-ups. Alex is also the founder and the CEO of Customer Success Excellence, the world's first awards event dedicated to customer success profession, and has been recognized as the 2020 Top 100 Customer Success Strategist by Success Coaching. Welcome to the show, Alex. We're so excited to have you talk to us today.
Thank you, Kimberly. Very excited to be here as well. Appreciate the invitation.
Before we dive into our interview with Alex, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content coming from thought leaders around the globe. Well, Alex, let's start with our first question. What, according to you, drives customer experience and customer success? When do you think or what do you conclude that the delivered customer experience is defining your customer success?
It's a great question, and I think a great place to start. I think to start, maybe define terms, because as you mentioned, my experience is in B2B, high growth, scale-ups, software scale-ups. And for me, I like to keep it quite simple, right? In that environment, CS is about the end goals of the customer, right? We say that a customer has been successful when they achieve their desired outcomes with our product or our service. And for me, I guess maybe summarize it in a word, it's the what, right? What have they achieved? Customer experience, on the other hand, is much more about the journey that they went through to achieve it, right? So the how in achieving the what, right? That to me is a very simple way to break it down. In terms of, defining, let's say, success with customer experience, I think really the word that comes to mind is friction, right? So how frictionless was your experience to get to your ultimate customer outcome? Was it easy for you to achieve your business goals, or was it challenging? I think if we take an example, customer success as a function is usually responsible for renewal of contracts. And you may have a customer that ticks all of the success boxes. You achieve this goal, that goal, faster than you expected. But if it was heavy lifting, it was hard work to get there, and they had a bad customer experience, all of that stuff isn't particularly useful, right? And they may still churn even though they were, quote, successful with your product. So I think those two things need to be considered and measured kind of separately with equal weight, to really kind of track the overall success of that customer's engagement with your business.
Well, yes. So now, since you spoke about the what and the how factor of customer success and customer experiences, do you think businesses can focus on customer success right from the beginning? What is the starting point here?
This is a great question, and I think something that a lot of, especially scale-ups and startups, get wrong. The very simplistic conventional wisdom is you need to make money, right? I'm not, I think, breaking any news when I say that. But as a business, we need to get revenue. So we're going to invest heavily in sales and marketing, top of funnel, and go kind of flood the market with information about our product. I think the challenge is the expectation gap that you build by doing that. Right? You're out there to the market saying, look at all this amazing stuff we could do for you, all of these business problems that we can solve, but without a dedicated customer success team to ensure that what you promised, in your marketing messaging and your sales engagements can actually be delivered, you have this expectation gap that is impossible or nearly impossible to close without a dedicated customer success function. So, my advice to startups that I advise and founders that I mentor is to start earlier than you think you need to, because it's much harder to catch up, right? I think that's a really important point to take away. I think the other thing to think about, of course, is about the sustainability of your growth, right? So starting customer success in a business, so in the customer's journey, the success of the customer, I would say, starts in the sales process itself, right? We're setting these expectations. We know what the customer is trying to achieve because they're telling us in the sales process. And then it's down to the customer success team to take that forward post-sale, right? And ensuring that there's a strong and coordinated sales to success handover between the sales function and the customer success function is important, so that the customer has a positive experience throughout the customer journey. The second part of my answer to your question is around when in the scaling of a company do you start with customer success, right? And I think, again, the answer is early. We have to think about sustainability of growth, right? So we invest heavily in sales and marketing, but ensuring that growth is sustainable, and we're not just pumping money into customer acquisition costs, but then churning that customer after their first month or their first year, right? Ensuring a high lifetime value of the customer, it underscores again the need for customer success being an early function, the first 10 employees of a B2B startup, I think, because ultimately, as I say before, it's very hard to catch up once you're there. And I would also say that these things compound, right? If your customer is able to achieve their goals, right, the what that we talked about before, and they have a great experience achieving those goals, right, the how, customer experience, they're more likely to become customer advocates, which is incredibly important in the early days of your startup journey, because they will go out and help exponentially make your sales process more efficient and help you grow faster. Right? So you're reducing customer acquisition costs and shortening your sales cycles. So really linking these concepts together, I think, is important. And I think the businesses, startups that I speak with that are able to scale faster and leaner, understand the connection between all of these individual functions on that customer's journey, and how they compound, which is important.
I completely agree with you, Alex. Moving on to our next question, which kind of depends on what you've just said, is what are the biggest challenges to customer satisfaction faced by customer success managers in this 2020 being so unpredictable?
Unpredictable is a kind way of putting it, I think, indeed. It's a great question, and one that I speak with a lot of other CS leaders about quite often. How do we reflect on the lessons of 2020 and try and 2020 was an exception, right? But of course we're here in 2021 still as an exception. So it's really becoming the new normal, or business as usual, at least for the foreseeable future. I think some of the challenges that we saw was essentially a raising of the bar. And let me explain what I mean by that. So let's again keep it simple. Customer success manager, they usually own the renewal of a contract, and they ensure the customer is achieving their business goals. They will proactively engage with that customer every quarter, every half year, especially in a high touch model. You have like an executive business review, right? And before 2020, we get on an airplane, we go to that customer, maybe it's a very high value contract. We get everybody around a table and we sit there and we talk. And a lot of times we might be talking at them, not with them, for 2 hours. But the executive sponsor of the contract will show up, they'll listen intently, or at least pretend that they're listening intently, and we leave, right? Again, keeping it very simple, we're now doing all of that remotely, right? So if this process of executive business review, as an example, isn't providing value to that customer, isn't interesting to that customer, isn't helpful, they're sitting on the end of a Zoom call with their camera off and not paying any attention, right? So again, I think the expectations of customers, where customer engagement was maybe kind of ticking the box in the process map, but not providing value, the bar has been raised. And we saw that when budgets came under additional scrutiny. People have learned their lesson the hard way, I think. People's, buyers' budgets have been slashed by 50%. Where are they going to go to cut? and they're going to go to places where the engagement hasn't been providing value. I think also, though, they're going to go to places where the experience has been poor, right? And that's, again, why these equal measures of CS and CX are so key. If we had a bad experience, the customer had a bad experience, they would also consider cutting the contract and moving on in this kind of new normal. So I think that's some of the macro climate that's happening here, and why I think CSMs are essentially really, I think, rethinking the traditional CS playbook, right? We do executive business reviews because that's what you're supposed to do as a customer success manager. But actually, let's unthink some of those traditional concepts and think more critically from the customer's perspective. Are they providing value? I'm asking 5 stakeholders from my customer to join a meeting every quarter for 2 hours. Is that a good use of their time? Right? Do I truly understand how they're spending their time? So I think it's challenged customer success managers in a good way in 2020 to really kind of hone in on the value additive things and get rid of the more traditional, maybe tired things that we've been doing for several years. If I can just add 2 more things in terms of challenges that CSMs face. I would say, I think I talked a little bit about customer attention span, right? Whether the executive sponsor's paying attention. I think just to reiterate very quickly, if they're having an exceptional experience with you as a business, do they love working with you? Have they had frictionless engagements with you? They're probably more likely to show up to that executive business review, right? So I think, again, there's that CX element in there. But I think the other thing for me is this idea of span of control. And I'm not sure this is just a 2020 thing. I think maybe it's been exacerbated by the year that we've had. But I think one of the biggest challenges in customer success is the fact that CSMs, the remit of a CSM, right? CSMs own the renewal, right? But they're not directly responsible for support, for training, for onboarding, and all of these other post-sale functions that sit alongside CSMs. So you have this, this depth of focus, but then also, if there's an escalation or their experience was bad in one of these other departments, it ultimately falls back on the CSM as the holder of that renewal, right? So juggling and finding a good way to balance your day-to-day responsibilities as a CSM and your overall customer experience responsibilities, where if it impacts the customer, it kind of blows back on you. Finding that balance, I think, is important, which is why I think we'll continue to see an increase in the elevation of the chief customer officer role into the C-suite, because that's the one that's essentially aligning a function that owns all of these different departments with the experience of the customer in mind, so that they renew their contract, increase their lifetime value, and become advocates, as we talked about before.
Yes, I completely agree with what you said. And I think looking at how the situation is and how it will be, I think, yes, I think I will completely agree and take this point of yours. But now when we're talking about how unpredictable this year has been and how everyone just wants to game up their customer experience, in delivering this good customer experience, how can we tackle problems on infringement and counterfeit products, etc.? How can we turn a bad customer experience into a good and a delightful one?
This is an interesting question. I'm at Cognite, as you mentioned today, but before Cognite, I was at a brand protection company, technology company, where essentially looking for instances of counterfeit online and allowing brand rights holders, brands to enforce their intellectual property to remove these type of counterfeits. And so we would be dealing with these companies, big global brands, having customers come to them so unhappy about a product that they thought was legitimate, right? And I think for me, that to answer your question, I think it comes down to really this idea of expectation gaps, right? If I was expecting a mediocre experience and had a bad one, I'm a little bit unhappy, right? But if I buy a counterfeit product expecting a legitimate product, especially in the luxury high end, my expectation was up here and the reality is down here, right? So the wider the expectation gap, the more challenging it is, I think, to deliver a positive customer experience. So for me, I think it's about setting the right expectations, or excuse me, the right preconditions for success, right? So I think using this example of a high expectation gap situation where, as an example, they purchase a counterfeit product unknowingly. I think ensuring that the right preconditions have been set makes it a lot easier to deal with that big delta of expectation gap, right? And that to me goes back to this concept of continuously positive customer experience, right? If I'm infusing moments of surprise and delight in the engagement that customer has had with me as a business previously, right? I probably have more patience and more understanding, right? The preconditions for navigating this massive gap in expectation are more positive, right? Because you've already used kind of more proactive customer experience techniques, removal of friction, to ensure that the customer is able to handle this challenge that you and the customer and the business have, right? This big expectation gap. So I guess from my perspective, I think there's a big factor here of that the customer, when we have these big challenges, is coming into that conversation with a good understanding, a good loyalty and respect for the brand based on previously positive customer experience. Because ultimately things like this are going to happen, right? Big gaps in expectation where the customer expected X and they got something way far away from that are going to happen. But I think for me, the answer to your question about how to turn a delightful experience, a bad experience into a delightful one, is about ensuring that the preconditions have been set through previous engagements so that they're predisposed to understanding, right? I think, just as a counterpoint, or just as an additional point, I should say to that, is the opportunity that exists in this big expectation gap moment, right? I think the challenge you have with businesses kind of treating this as B2B as opposed to person, right? Oh, let's apply a standard templated response to this situation and that's going to solve the problem. No, there's a serious problem here that we need higher touch engagement, right? And having the intelligence to sense and know that is important. But if you do that right, against some serious odds, you turn that customer, you turn that negative experience into such a positive, right? Because if you can overshoot, right, and really kind of tackle this with the import that the customer expects, right, that customer then, I think, is predisposed again to being much more loyal to your brand. All right, so I think, I guess to answer the question, I would say, ensuring that the preconditions have been set previously by a positive, customer experience so that you can weather the exceptional moment storm, so to speak. And then, of course, dealing with it with the importance that that customer expects you to deal with it with. I think those two things would really help navigate those challenges that we saw with organizations that were dealing with things as serious as counterfeit products with a high expectation and a very low delivery.
Yes, that's nice. Do you have any examples or any story to share with us on how you've experienced or witnessed a bad experience turning into a good experience for the customer?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned before, in my time with this brand protection company, we were working with some of the world's largest luxury brands. And again, you have this expectation gap where you're buying a product that's incredibly expensive and maybe you've been saving up a long time, only to find that you bought a product through an illegitimate seller that wasn't real, right? So that's a real quandary we find ourselves in. So the example I can give you is kind of going back to what I mentioned before, is that if you overdo it and do it right and really kind of connect to the person and oversolve the problem, you can turn this negative situation into a really positive one and really build this loyalty and this advocacy that we talked about as being so important, regardless of whether this is a B2B engagement or a B2C engagement, as this was. So there's this company that sells high performance outerwear, right? So raincoats and very expensive, kind of used by mountaineers all over the world, right? So very high quality products meant to really stand the kind of test of time. And they offer a lifetime warranty for repairs, right? So they're already kind of declaring to the market, so if you will, that we provide a really excellent customer experience, because without any questions asked, we will fix issues with our products for their entire lifetime. The challenge was they started to see people sending in products that had their logo on it but we're not manufactured by them. So they're on the hook with high customer expectation and a big cost to repair these products that actually are not legitimate products and unfortunately were counterfeit. Right? So they used it as an opportunity to educate buyers about the dangers of counterfeit products. They said, look, unfortunately, this is not our product. However, we will, cover the product because you attempted to buy it legitimately from us. And they had a big kind of PR campaign around this challenge that their customers and them both experienced against the bad actor producing fake goods, right? So they got the opportunity to rebuild and overdo it in terms of satisfying their customers, educate the market, and also I would say kind of get some free publicity, right, to acquire new customers because they're advertising how regardless of whether they were at fault, how they could deliver against their mandate of lifetime guarantee.
So in this process of actually converting the bad experience to the good experience, do you think there are any interactive tools or resources that can boost the performance of clients and customers? In terms of establishing client relationships here, how powerful are chatbots and live chat or live chat plus chatbots integration help here?
Great question. And I think I'm if I kind of put my B2B hat back on, I'm continuously surprised by the lack of companies that invest in chat, right? And I think so chat is my answer to your first question around interactive resources. I think I think we're spot on as that being a real important aspect as it comes to engaging with customers digitally. And I'm surprised, as I say, by the B2B space, slowness or kind of lack of aggression. I don't know what the right word is, but to adopt these solutions, right? Because you look at the B2B space, the B2C space, excuse me, customers, regardless of whether you can control it or not, customers buy outerwear. They buy something online. They engage with chatbots every day. Right. So I think there's a real macro trend happening of customers expecting a Facebook-like experience, right, or a frictionless B2C experience when they engage with B2B products as well. And for me, the gap between the interactivity, the time to resolve in B2C scenarios versus in B2B scenarios needs to close. And I think customers are going to expect B2B companies to step their game up. Right. And the ones that do earlier will obviously have a real competitive differentiator. So I think customer expectations are going to continue to shift, with B2C companies really setting the bar. I also think there's kind of a misinterpretation of the utility of chatbots in B2B startups. Right. And let me explain what I mean by that. I think the old view of chatbots and using AI to engage with customers is that it's meant for high volume and it's meant for case deflection, right? I need a very simple equation, right? The more cases that I can have customers resolve themselves by not speaking to a person, the more cases that we can handle as a company, right? To me, that's a pretty low bar, right? And that's kind of an old way to think about it. At the end of the day, the customer is coming to you because they need something and they don't really care which team is meant to handle it. And so it's not so much about B2B. It's not so much about being able to case deflect and do things at scale. For me, it's much more about availability and the ability to provide customers with an answer as soon as possible in the most frictionless way. So my point really is, in the old kind of view of chatbots, you'd have businesses say, oh, I get 10,000 cases a day. Maybe I need to start thinking about a chatbot. But actually, why are we not thinking about that when you get one case a day? Because the time it takes for a person to respond to that case, whether it's an hour, it's 8 hours, that's 8 hours of that customer not getting their job done. They don't care that it's a support team that's based over here that needs to deal with it, or I need to transfer it to the next tier, right? That's just a waste of their time. And that's an introduction for me, in my opinion, of unnecessary friction, right? And we talked about the importance of removing friction previously. So I think from my perspective, I'd like to see more smaller organizations, high growth organizations adopt chatbots sooner, because ultimately the customer is there to solve a problem, and the faster you can do it with quality, the better. It ultimately leads to a more positive experience. So I think there's a little recalibration that either businesses need to do or consumers will do for us because of their experience on the B2C side, right? Their expectations continuing to grow. And I think one other answer to your question around interactive resources, I'm a huge fan of communities as well, especially in the B2B, in the B2B space especially. Again, I think they're underutilized. The ability to connect customers with customers and build a forum and community around your product, is again another way to remove friction. You're removing your company as the central contact point and having customers learn from each other, right? And it makes it easier and more frictionless for that customer to achieve their business goals, whether they're able to chat to a chatbot and get an immediate response, or chat to another person that doesn't work for your company who may be online or very interested in connecting with that user. So I think, for me, I hope in 2021 we see a lot more focus in this area.
Yes, I think that the concept of communities and having customer forums are very underrated. It's just that people don't take it because you don't get quick responses from there, and it's not much of you. It's like an overall thing. You have to give it time. That's when you realize that it's going to work out. Yes.
And can I just, and if I could just jump in with that, I so agree with what you said, but also kind of the overall concept of adoption of systems, right? You're not going to adopt a community because nobody responds fast enough. Well, why don't you put your chatbot in the community? So the only place the customer can go to engage with the chatbot is in the community or even in the product, right? I see, as businesses try and build out these massive customer journey maps, I still see this lack of focus on how the customer will engage with the journey, right? So you have a chatbot over here, you have a community over here, you have a training platform over here, you have a documentation website over here. It's great, all of this stuff exists, but the fact that the customer isn't able to adopt or navigate, especially given they probably have more than one software vendor relationship they're navigating, right? It's a really kind of selfish view of the world for that software vendor, right? So thinking kind of outside in about how to use all of these avenues that are available to you in a unified way to remove friction and almost kind of force multiply the value of these individual systems, I think deserves a lot more attention in the B2B space as well. So excuse me if I may now agree with you passionately as well.
Yes, I completely agree with what you've said. I think it would be a great idea if companies could integrate chatbots and their live chat into communities and help it grow. Yes. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience, Alex?
Yeah, so just on that point, if I could leave the audience here with one thing, I would just fundamentally say and encourage people to think outside in, right? If we go back to that previous example about building out a customer journey map, takes 3 months, you bring all these different departments together, but it's like, and you can build out the best process, you can build out the best playbook. But if you're thinking inside out, what does each department in my company need to do to meet their KPIs? You're really just going to create an internal process document. Because if the customer experiences this journey in a link to a documentation site, a chatbot that's on one page of the website but not in the community, or a link to a Google Doc, right, when they go to their onboarding phase, you're really just kind of exposing an internal process document to the customer with no regard for adoption, ease of use, and the overall experience of how they engage with that customer journey and with you as a business. Right. So I think for me, I have a few phrases for 2021, but one of them would be about thinking outside in as it pertains to how customers experience your business. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, I in May launched Customer Success Excellence, which is the first Customer Success Awards program. That is unfortunately an in-person event. So we will be launching, I think, at the end of 2021 when the climate out there supports doing things in person. But it was a really refreshing experience because I'm learning from others about what true excellence in CS is and learning kind of the best examples from the best in the customer success industry. But also I became a customer, right? I was procuring a website vendor, a marketing vendor. Right. And I got to put myself in the shoes of a customer and really experience what good customer experience looks like and what frustrating, take 3 days to respond to me customer experience looks like. And I guess the last thing I would leave the audience here with is about is about actually taking yourself through your own customer journey and customer experience, right? And actually putting some time on your calendar, if you're a CS leader or a CX leader, and okay, this month I'm going to spend an hour becoming a customer of my own product. And I'm going to really kind of understand what that onboarding experience is like for a customer, and I'm going to do it myself. And I may find a few surprises or a few things that don't work exactly right. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity to connect and again, look outside in on the ideal journey that you think you deliver and ensure that you actually do.
Yes, I think this is an amazing perspective to looking at for 2021. Thank you so much, Alex, for giving us your time. Your insights were really valuable. And I know our audience is just going to enjoy this interview as much as I did.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
We'll be back with a new episode and a new expert soon, so stay tuned and we'll see around you for the next one.